Join us now for Education Matters, a weekly look at the real people and real stories in education across North Carolina.
Welcome to Education Matters, presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm Keith Poston. In 1997, the North Carolina Supreme Court held unanimously in the landmark Leandro case that North Carolina public school students are entitled under the state constitution to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education, and therefore it's the state's responsibility to provide it. In November 2017, more than 20 years after the initial ruling, Governor Roy Cooper formed the Governor's Commission on Access to Sound Basic Education in the latest and perhaps most ambitious effort to date to ensure that the state meets its constitutional obligation when it comes to public education. On this week's show, we talk with several key players in that effort, including the Commission chair, to find out where we are and what's next. Before we tackle our main topics, we open with Edlines, a quick scan of education headlines across North Carolina and the U.S. Last week, the state released the latest A to F school performance grades, a system created by the General Assembly in 2012. Critics say the letter grades unfairly stigmatize schools serving high poverty communities where low-income students tend to get lower letter grades than schools with more affluent enrollments. The data suggests they may have a point. Among schools where more than 81% of students come from low-income families, 69% of the schools received a D or an F. In schools where the poverty rate is less than 20%, only 1.7% of schools received a D or an F. The General Assembly made improving third grade reading skills a top priority with its Read to Achieve program that introduced a new series of tests along with summer reading programs and mandatory retention for third graders not reading at grade level. Unfortunately, last week's reading test results showed very little improvement. Third grade reading proficiency dropped from 57.8% in 2016-17 to 55.9% in 2018. Since Read to Achieve was created in 2012, third grade reading proficiency has actually dropped 5% overall. Finally, a new study is out showing the teacher wage penalty, that is the wage gap between teachers and comparable professionals, is growing nationally. Teachers now earn 18.7% less than other college-educated workers, according to the Economic Policy Institute. They found that the teacher wage penalty has increased significantly, with teachers earning just 1.8% less than comparable workers in 1994. North Carolina teachers, according to the study, has the second highest wage gap in the country, with a 35.5% gap compared to other college-educated professionals in the state. Remember, you can visit the Public School Forum's website at ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and read more about each of the headlines, as well as other topics we cover each week. As I said at the top of the show, the Leandro case has been going on now for more than 20 years. Is this new effort going to help bring a resolution? Our first guest, I think, hopes so, and so they are Brad Wilson. Brad, you are the chair of the Governor's Commission on Access to Sound Basic Education. Some of our viewers may recognize you also as the longtime former now CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. Next to Brad is Melody Chalmers. Melody serves on the commission alongside Brad. She is the principal of E.E. Smith High School, a friend of the program, has been on before, and the former North Carolina Principal of the Year. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
All right, Brad, I'm going to start with you. What was the goal? I mean, sort of why was the commission created in the first place? Obviously, you talked to the governor, but I hope you did before he appointed you as chair. So what was the thinking behind this new effort?
Well, Keith, the answer to that question is really found in your introduction that we were listening to very carefully. The Leandro case is now over 20 years old, and there has been subsequent litigation relevant to this whole topic. And so Governor Cooper, as he came into office and was setting his priorities, believed that now is the time, long past the time, that new emphasis and energy be placed on the implementation and the execution of the court order. And so what our core and central task is to help refresh our recollection, as well as help refine what it is that Leandro means. What does that constitutional language frame out for the state of North Carolina? And then how would we go about as a state actually implementing and executing those things that we need to do here in this state to improve those letter grade scores that you just talked about, for example.
Right. Now, Melody, it's an impressive group of folks on the commission, including yourself, but I know that from looking at the list, and I've been to a couple of the meetings, I mean, you're on the front lines. I mean, you are a principal right now. You're in a county. I mean, Cumberland County, which is where I'm from. I mean, it wouldn't be considered, sort of defined as a low wealth county, but it certainly has challenges and issues. So do you feel a part of your role being on this commission is to, I don't know, sort of reality check sort of what's going on?
Absolutely. I'm glad to have had the opportunity to bring the practical insights into the different topics that have been discussed at the previous meetings. Our focus on fulfilling the constitutional mandate to make sure that all students have a sound basic education is so important to all persons that work in education. So it's been a privilege as a principal to be able to provide input to the commission and also to learn so that then I can take that information back and share with my colleagues in Cumberland County what we are doing as a state, what this commission is trying to accomplish through our commission meetings so that we can make sure that all of our schools have effective teachers, principals, and all of our students have the resources they need to be successful.
Well, I'll jump off on the what have you learned? I was thinking about it before you came on. You were in the healthcare business for a long time, and you're now working on this. I mean, you don't get much more personal to families and communities than health and education. I mean, what have you learned about sort of what's going on across the state in education?
Well, the commission, we've met 3 times. In fact, we were going to have our 4th meeting this past Thursday, but the weather got in the way in Hickory. So we've been very much in a learning mode, and we're continuing to do that as we transition now to acting on that which we have learned. But a couple of data points, things are still in flight, but we have learned that, for example, the state is funding less than 2/3 of the total funding of our public schools, and counties are now funding close to 25%. That's been getting out of balance. Overall per pupil expenditure since the recession of 2008 has declined by 10%. And if you adjust for inflation, teacher salaries have also fallen, I think, somewhere in the range of 8%. If you just adjust it in real terms. So we're not here today to declare a lot of data points from which we will take our action, but we are learning a lot. The importance of early childhood education so that children are coming to school healthy and ready to learn. That is a very, very important subject that our 5 work groups are now focused on, and they'll begin to bring some findings and information back to the full commission for our consideration.
And we've got some graphics we're going to pull up on the screen. Some of this is related to what you just referenced, which is the role of the local communities. Because I'm sure you've probably seen it in Fayetteville. I mean, there are more things that the state is relying on your community. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of resources and investment?
Well, absolutely. We are concerned about having equitable resources across the board, that schools or communities that are more affluent, that those students don't have. They may have more resources, but how do we level the playing field? That's a lot of what we've been talking about.
On the screen right now, we've got a chart that was actually from the Forum's local school finance board that shows sort of the top wealthy counties and how much they are able to put in.
Right, and so that's important to make sure that we address those issues of equity in schools. And so we had some presentations at one of our earlier meetings about funding,
right,
and the different ways that counties are able to supplement or not supplement the education of students. And so I think that's a very important aspect that the commission is attempting to address.
Well, let's talk about just as we sort of wind down this part of the show, Brad. The General Assembly are the ones who allocate funding and are going to make the rules. I mean, you're obviously aware of what's going on with their school finance reform task force. Are y'all talking? I mean, is this something that will eventually line up as far as you make some recommendations as a commission, legislature, got to do some things?
Well, absolutely. This is a process, and we're kind of in the middle of it. But the role of the commission and what we intend to do is work with all policymakers, executive, legislative, everyone who cares about public education in North Carolina, to bring a common voice and a strong focus about actually moving the needle after 20 years of litigation and making sure that our communities across the state can feel positive impact about not only the work of the commission, but the work of the court-appointed consultant that I think you're going to
Yeah,
explore
we're
a
gonna
little bit
get into
more
that in the
later,
next segment, yeah.
through the great work that our educational professionals do. So this is a collaborative effort, and we will be working very closely, all those who care about making a difference in public education in North Carolina.
Well, I think everybody cares about it. If they don't, they should, but we appreciate you coming on and explaining a little bit. We're going to continue our conversation next with a little bit more of the specifics about some of the litigation and what may happen next. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to talk to one of the original plaintiff districts and the lead attorney in the Leandro case to get their take on a possible resolution. But before we go to break, see if you can answer this question. True or false? According to state law, only 50% of teachers at a charter school must be certified.
Education Matters is brought to you each week in part by Paragon Bank, serving others, enriching lives.
Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer true? While all teachers in district or traditional public schools must be certified, state law today only requires that 50% of teachers in a charter school be certified. We're going to continue our discussion on the Governor's Commission on Access to Sound Basic Education and what it may mean. And we have two guests who know a lot about it. Melanie Dubas. Melanie, you are the lead attorney. You're with Parker Poe, but you're the lead attorney for the plaintiffs in this very long case. Maybe we're getting to, I don't know if we're at the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning or something, but we'll find that out. Deborah Dallas, next to you. Deborah, you are the Assistant Superintendent, Hoke County Schools, one of the originals. And so I want to ask both of you, I guess first, let me ask you first, Melanie. How did this process with the Governor's Commission, and I want to make sure we also explain what Judge David Lee, who's overseeing the case now, he has basically the plaintiffs have gotten together and the parties in the lawsuit and is asked to, an outside consultant who's helping. So sort of how did this all come about at this point right now?
Right, so as you've mentioned and as Brad noted, this case has been going on for a long time. We've been in the remedial phase of the case for a while, which is how is the state going to address the constitutional deficiencies that Judge Manning originally found and that the Supreme Court upheld. And after a number of years, the parties have come to realize that, and interestingly, Judge Manning wrote this in his final trial decision, they've come to realize that one of the reasons that children are not uniformly being provided the opportunity for a sound basic education is the lack of a coordinated statewide educational effort to address the needs of at-risk children. And Judge Manning saw that back in the early 2000s, and we've come to realize that it's that statewide, coordinated, comprehensive remedy that's ultimately going to bring to bear the fruits of this case.
And so, because really what's been happening over the years with Judge Manning was, it wasn't so much putting a plan together, it was really the state kept coming in and saying, we're doing it, right? I mean, wasn't that part, I mean, it really wasn't creating a plan, it was really trying to prove that we didn't need one.
Correct. It was the state coming in and showing the efforts that the state had put into place. And in all fairness, we did make some progress in the early 2000s and up until the recession in terms of reducing class size, increasing early childhood education, teacher recruitment and retention. But since 2008, we have made declines, as your statistics and test scores have shown.
Well, Deborah, I want to talk about Hoke County Schools. I know Hoke County Schools. I know your superintendent well. Hoke's one of the, really of all the districts, I would say, has done as much as they can do with what you've got, but it's not enough. And I do want to get into this question about resources too, because that's, but tell me what are you seeing in Hoke County sort of from the original suit to sort of where we are now in 2018?
We're really proud of the accomplishments that we've had over the years. As Melanie noted, we have made progress. We do a great job with our public-private partnerships. We can say that 100% of our schools have shown or met or exceeded growth on their reading scores. But at the end of the day, we are still experiencing a lot of the same challenges that were brought forth in that original case. Due to even though we're taxed at a higher rate, we just don't have the ability to generate the revenue. So our per pupil expenditure does remain in the bottom 5. So we have a hard time with the resources, providing our students for what they need and they deserve.
And what does that look like? When we talk about, look, sometimes I hear folks, they get tired of hearing education advocates saying we need more money, but
Right.
per pupil spending, bottom 5, what does that show up like in a classroom and in the school?
Right. Well, without that funding, we have a hard time making sure that we have technology in our students' hands, which is extremely important now. Even professional learning for our teachers and our principals, making sure that our students who are at risk have those intervention services, that's additional personnel, it's support teams for our at-risk students in special ed. So it really, it takes away that ability to have that coordinated system in a school to provide for those students.
Right. Now, Melanie, and I think from our viewers, we got some very sophisticated viewers that know these things. But the key elements of the court rulings that we need a competent certified teacher in every classroom, a competent effective leader, adequate resources. Are they still the same really sort of key 3 legs of the stool?
Those are still the same 3 legs of the stool, and Judge Manning also talked about a 4th leg of the stool, if you will, and that is an accountability system to measure whether we're making progress in those other 3 areas. And so those are the 3 areas that the court-appointed expert, the expert who's going to advise the court on what a statewide coordinated plan looks like, those are the 3 areas that the consultants are focusing on, and those are the areas that the Governor's Commission is focusing on as well.
All right. Well, you're an attorney. I got a question for you. Let's fast forward ahead.
All right.
The plaintiffs agree on a plan.
Yep.
You've got a plan. You take it to the Governor's Commission. The Commission endorses it and says, "This is what we need. We are missing this, this, and this, and so the state needs to do this." So what? I mean, if there is a court judgment, is there a remedy? Is there a enforcement mechanism the way our state is set up? I mean, the court can't fund schools, for example.
That's right, but the court can interpret the Constitution, and what our state Supreme Court has said is that the court can impose a remedy after giving the executive and the legislative branches due time to come up with a remedy. If they don't, the court itself can order a remedy. And I think Judge Lee is looking to the expert consultants that he's retained. He's looking to the commission to advise him as to what that remedy will look like. And I would echo what Brad said, though, in terms of all of the branches of government and the litigants coordinating towards this effort. I think what we will end up with is a very comprehensive and research-based plan forward. And my hope is, as Brad said, all those who care about education will come together and get on board to implement that plan.
Last word from you, Deborah. What do you want to see? What do you want to see for your students in Hoke County?
You know, we want to see that they truly have access to that basic sound education. We want to make sure that our students have the same resources that students in wealthier districts would have. We want them to be on that equal playing field. We want them to have opportunity. We want them to have those extended learning opportunities. We want them to have what their right is. We want them to have what every other child should have.
Yeah, and growing up, and I have people in Eastern North Carolina, and where I grew up. I mean, it's the things you're talking about. It's almost like the things you don't see, right? It's like you and sometimes you don't even know. Maybe a family doesn't recognize
Right.
how much more
Somebody else has.
should be available, right?
Right. And I think the worrying thing is that the gap between the higher wealth districts and the lower wealth, it's widening.
Right.
You know, so that's why we see this as a turning point, not only in just the case, but for public education for all students, including those students from low wealth areas.
Right.
This is their opportunity.
Well, I mean, this is important, and you know, I appreciate the work that you're doing trying to move it forward and also to explain it. We're going to watch the next steps with the commission and see what happens. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
After the break, this week's Leadership Spotlight. Each week, Education Matters spotlights individuals demonstrating exceptional leadership in education in North Carolina based on nominations from you, our viewers. This week, we spotlight a great program and effort, Go Global NC.
Leadership Spotlight is brought to you by Participate, where we believe every student deserves equitable access to quality education.
What we want to do is help North Carolinians reap the benefits of global engagement and mitigate some of those challenges of globalization. So to be culturally competent and to have that idea of how you can interact with the rest of the world is just critical. We do that through a number of different kinds of programs and events. Those programs are programs that incorporate both study here in North Carolina as well as an international immersion experience. We have an 8th grade science teacher. She traveled with us to Germany, and one of the things that she was so impressed by there was the commitment by schools, towns, communities to sustainability. And so she came back and she gave them a research assignment. They could develop some sustainability plans for the town of Cary that would improve life. And the top presenters actually got to present their plans to council members. Another teacher is a visual arts teacher, and she went to South Africa, and she got very excited by this idea of the comparison between the civil rights movements. And she came back and wrote a play. She got some artists in residence to come in, musicians who taught some of the students drumming. They just involved the whole community in this play that they presented a number of different times, and they used the proceeds to benefit the United Way in Chatham County as well as a South African charity. We had a high school math teacher who traveled with us, and one of the things that struck him as a challenge that happens around the world is about access to upper level math. Students in North Carolina and around the world have questions about these challenging math problems, and they don't really understand them. So he created a YouTube channel called ABSS Math Help, and he invited people to send questions in about math problems that they didn't understand. And his students would solve the math problems on video, and so far they've had people from 55 different countries who are able to access this. Teachers come back and they excite their kids learning about the global community. They find ways to take students abroad. They integrate it in their classes. They create new global classes and international classes. They encourage their kids to take world languages. Just so many different ways that they get kids excited about learning about the world and about the opportunities that are out there for them.
If you know someone that deserves to be recognized, please visit our website at ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and you'll find a link to nominate someone in your community. After the break, this week's final word. It has been 21 years since the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the state was responsible for providing every child access to a sound basic education. Subsequent rulings defined what that means. I mentioned this earlier: a well-trained, competent teacher in every classroom, a well-trained, competent principal in every school, and enough resources so that every child has an equal opportunity for education. Throughout the process, the state has presented data and plans to demonstrate it is meeting its obligation. And time after time, the judges have disagreed. First, Judge Howard Manning, and most recently, Judge David Lee, who wrote in May of this year that the state board has failed to present convincing evidence that North Carolina is moving closer to providing students with their fundamental rights guaranteed in the state constitution. So why are we still here, 21 years later, when it's been abundantly clear for years that too many children are being denied this constitutional right? We know too many local school systems are underfunded and understaffed to meet their students' need, a situation that is most acutely true in our poorer and rural parts of our state. The General Assembly created a special task force last year to look at overhauling how schools are funded, but incredibly said it will not look at the adequacy or equity of the funding, only the process. What is the point? To create a more efficient way to run the same system that is failing too many children? Perhaps the effort that we discussed today on the show may point a way toward a better solution for North Carolina and for our students. That's it for this week's show. Thanks for watching, and make sure you tune in next week for our new shows of Education Matters.